Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. My name is Tom Ricks. This is the next in a podcast series I'm calling The Sins of Silicon Valley. And today we're going to talk about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. As I've said, I could do an entire podcast on just everything that's screwed up and wrong about Facebook. But I'm basically restricting these extra 2 podcast episodes to just 2, right? The next one is going to be on the Milgram experiment and the unlicensed and basically unethical psychological experimentation that Facebook does on a regular basis. And today we're going to talk about basically the rampant data privacy issues that Facebook has, the worst of which is Cambridge Analytica. But you can't talk about Cambridge Analytica without talking about a colorful individual, and by colorful I mean evil, by the name of Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is a guy who is supposedly a guy you might get along with, in the sense that he's a nerd. He clearly likes Lord of the Rings because 2 of his companies are named Palantir and Mithril. He's bought citizenship in New Zealand. He does all kinds of supposedly ethical things like give to the Foundation to protect journalistic integrity. But basically, let's start with the obvious. Anybody who names their major data company Palantir has issues. Like just flat out. For those of you not familiar, in Lord of the Rings, there's an artifact called a Palantir, which is basically a demonic crystal ball that was originally used by the free forces of Middle-earth to fight the forces of Mordor and coordinate their efforts by, being a crystal ball. And Sauron, being Sauron, looked at these crystal balls and corrupted them so that anybody that looked into them went insane and saw only the worst possible outcome. So imagine this is a guy who wants to create a data company using Facebook data collection, which, as I said in the last podcast episode, everything that I talk about in any of these podcasts about any company, Facebook does it and worse. They are the worst company of the tech companies. Everything they do is bad, like just bad. Today, we had the amazing privilege of the Facebook Oversight Board decided in their magnanimity to continue to extend the ban on Trump from using Facebook for another 6 months. Woo! Yay! Hooray! Everybody on Twitter is like celebrating what should have been a permanent ban from a guy that used their platform to basically encourage people to commit actual rebellion and actual criminal murder and actual terroristic threats on anybody that's to the left of them on the political spectrum, including, by the way, conservative Republicans like Lynn Cheney. So anyway, everybody knows, like it's just a known fact at this point, that Facebook collects huge amounts of data on everything you do on the platform, everything you like, everything every group you join, in fact, even your private Facebook messages to each other, or on WhatsApp, or on Instagram. All of this information is put in one giant data pool that Facebook uses to put together a profile of who you are. And Google does the same thing, and so does Apple, and so does Amazon. But Facebook leaks like a sieve. They don't care about your privacy. They sell your information to the highest bidder. They're basically once or twice a year at this point, there is a newspaper article about a major data breach for your Facebook information. And if you're on Facebook, you should pretty much understand that anything you like or anything you comment on or anything that you enjoy or anything that you even watch or look at is being recorded and coalesced and used to promote ads on Facebook. And full disclosure, up until January, I used Facebook ads myself. For a small business, Facebook is, bar none, the best platform to advertise and to get targeted advertising. Google sucks, frankly. If you're a big advertiser, Google is great for that. But if you're a small business, Google is a terrible platform. You can't get anything done for a small budget in terms of advertising with Google. But you certainly can with Facebook. For $10, you can reach hundreds of people if you target your ad right. And yet, let's talk about Cambridge Analytica, right? So Cambridge Analytica is a firm that worked with the right to shell out garbage in favor of right-wing politicians, and they were in particular instrumental in the creation of Brexit. Now, for those of you not familiar, Brexit was this little vote that England took that passed with like a tiny, tiny majority, mainly due to targeted ads that were racist and sexist and lies, largely fueled by data provided by Cambridge Analytica. And Cambridge Analytica used a poll, one of those stupid Facebook polls like, what kind of Brillo pad are you, right? Except in this case, it basically took the political information for people in England, particularly North England, and was used to target lies. And now, at this point, England is basically lost. Right? North England, which used to be very pro-labor, has become infected with right-wing lies and racism. And England is basically a racist country at this point. And so is large chunks of the rural United States. And part of that has been perpetrated by Facebook and by Twitter. But Facebook much more so, not just because of the dreaded and satanic algorithm that deliberately steers you towards conflict and things that you're going to react to keep you engaged so that it can sell you advertising. And again, I'll be talking about that, the psychological abuse that takes place in Facebook next podcast. But I want to highlight the unique evil that Facebook has committed that none of the other platforms even approach and the same level of evil, right? YouTube has trash on it and allows fascists to broadcast their message. Twitter is its own category of evil and has its own agenda, which is namely Bitcoin. But Facebook is a whole other category. And aside from just any way it can make a buck, Peter Thiel, who is still on, by the way, the board of Facebook and has been very close friends with Mark Zuckerberg from practically the beginning, has been the worm tongue. See the Lord of the Rings influence there I made? The worm tongue in Mark Zuckerberg's ear, keeping him from effectively shutting down actual terroristic threats or actual lies on Facebook, and having Facebook basically be a permanent festering sore in democracy. Now, I want to categorically say that Peter Thiel is now on record as thinking that democracy doesn't work. He thinks that democracy hasn't functioned for his radical libertarian ideology since the 1920s. Well, let's think about what happened since the 1920s. Oh, yeah. Racism has been reduced and classism has been reduced, and the size of the federal government and its ability to regulate rampant corporations that abuse their power, such as Facebook and Palantir, have happened since the 1920s. So when Peter Thiel is saying that he's no longer in favor of democracy, what he really means is, I think that Vladimir Putin is a swell guy, and that technocratic, autocratic governments like China and Russia are the way we ought to go. And what that means is that in a government like that, if the government likes you, then you get to keep your property and you don't have government thugs come in and take it from you, even though he claims to basically be a libertarian. But the thing is that what he really means is that he wants to have power and he doesn't want you to have power. because he says he's a libertarian, but nobody who's a libertarian can ever be against anything but a democratic solution, because you cannot have a libertarian society in a dictatorship. You just can't, right? A dictatorship cannot maintain its power by the invisible hand. It's not going to happen, right? A dictatorship will do whatever and however it needs to accomplish something to stay in power. Look at China, right? China talks about fighting corruption all the time, but China doles out favor to local corrupt politicians. China is not a free market, and it's not a free society. Peter Thiel has also criticized the tech companies for not fighting China enough, but you'll notice how he doesn't say any such thing about Russia. And the truth is that when it comes to fighting people who propose democracy, or even, frankly, just generic critics of the government, both Russia and China are absolutely ruthless in how they handle political opponents. So when Peter Thiel says that democracy doesn't work, what he's really saying is that he has no ideology and that he wants to seize power, just like every conservative Republican that he backs and that he is good buddies with. And if you were to draw a crazy conspiracy theory wall chart that showed the crazy Koch organization and Rupert Murdoch and the Mercer family and all of these fascist autocratic regimes all around the world, you will see again and again how Palantir and Peter Thiel and his slime keeps reappearing. It's kind of funny how that works, isn't it? And the last nail in the coffin that I want to throw out there is that Palantir is super buddy-buddy with renegade law enforcement in this country, especially state and local. When Snowden and the WikiLeaks stuff came out, Palantir immediately went, just like Wormtongue, to the NSA and the government and local corrupt red state governments, but also, frankly, corrupt blue state city governments run by mayors that love to have abusive murder police, and basically said, all these protesters, we can give you their Facebook profile. Right, we can give you their iPhone signature and give you real-time data about who they are and who they're talking to, and let you crush them before they even show up to a protest. Basically, Peter Thiel is the devil, and he is the right-hand force of evil for everything that Mark Zuckerberg does that's wrong with the world. This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright 2021.
To fight the forces of evil!